Now I'm pleased to announce our featured keynote speaker this morning, Rachel Wilson. Rachel is Managing Director at Morgan Stanley and the Head of Cybersecurity for Wealth Management. Rachel and her team are in charge of protecting the firm and client data and advising Morgan Stanley's leadership on cyber risks and threats. Prior to coming to Morgan Stanley, Rachel worked for 15 years at the National Security Agency, the NSA, where she held a variety of positions, including running the agency's counterterrorism operations. Her team was charged with detecting and disrupting terrorist plots against the US and our allies. More recently, she spent 5 years as head of the NSA's cyber exploitation operations. In that capacity, she oversaw the planning and execution of cyber operations against foreign targets. What she's going to convey to us are some of the things that you need to think about in regards to one of the major challenges in your business looking forward. We're delighted to have her with us this morning, so please join me in giving a warm Barron's welcome to Rachel Wilson.
Well, good morning. And let me start by congratulating all of you for being here today. This is an incredible place, an incredible venue. I have never seen so many well-dressed women in one place. So give yourselves a round of applause for being here this morning. I am honored, I am frankly humbled to be here in front of all of you today to talk about my passion, my life's work in cybersecurity. As Sterling said, I came to the financial services industry last year after 15 years at the NSA. I had a few different jobs there. I spent a couple of years running our counterterrorism mission. This was during the Times Square bombing, the Detroit underwear bombing, some pretty exciting times. Then I spent a couple of years in the UK, helping the British get ready for the 2012 Olympics. This was, as you would expect, we had a large number of terrorist plots to those Olympics, but I was there really to work on the cybersecurity plots to those Olympics. So this ranged from the Chinese trying to hack into the clocks, the timers at the Olympic venues, the Russians trying to hack into the databases that house the Olympic drug testing records. Makes sense now. I'll tell you, we did not understand it at the time. To just general miscreants looking to cause some trouble, rub some grit in the eyes of the British leading into those Olympics. And then I returned home to suburban Maryland, where NSA is headquartered, in the summer of 2012, after watching those Olympics go off without a hitch, to my dream job. This was running NSA's cyber exploitation operations mission, which, brass tacks, is your American nation-state hackers. So these are your hackers hacking into the networks of our adversaries, the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, stealing the secrets out of their networks, giving them to our policymakers and our warfighters. Incredibly proud of the work that I did in that time. But I'll tell you, I had been thinking for years about what would be my next step, the next step of my patriotic journey. And I had made the decision a few years prior that when it came time for me to leave government, to leave the NSA, that I was going to come to the financial sector to work to protect all of you. And I can tell you the exact moment that I made this decision. It's a moment that most of you in this room will remember well. And this was back in December of 2012, where for a few months, I can now tell you the Iranian government had been conducting cyber attacks against the American financial sector, really going bank to bank to bank, up and down Wall Street, conducting what we call distributed denial of service attacks, all in retaliation for the financial sanctions that we had levied against the Central Bank of Iran and their oil industry. The Iranians recognize that cyber represents an asymmetric advantage, that 40 people in the basement in Tehran could and did wreak havoc on Wall Street for the better part of 2 years. And in December of 2012, the Iranians went up against the NASDAQ, and the attacks that they conducted against the NASDAQ were so severe that the NASDAQ actually did not trade for multiple days as a result of these attacks. You can imagine how frustrating that was to those of us in government at the time, thinking to ourselves, you know, if the Iranians were shooting Hellfire missiles into Lower Manhattan, we damn well would have been doing something about it. But because they were shooting quote-unquote cyber bullets, at Wall Street wasn't a lot we in government could do. So it was in that moment that I decided my next phase would be coming to the financial sector. And that's exactly what I did last spring. For me, this is about protecting the critical national infrastructure that you all represent. You manage a huge chunk of America's current holdings, America's future, America's legacy. And protecting all of you, protecting your firms, that's what we take very, very seriously. All right, so today, a few things. I'm going to give you a sense of what the risk landscape looks like, what you and your firms are up against when it comes to cybersecurity threats. Then I'm going to give you a sense of what your firms are doing about it. But even more importantly, what you as individuals and as those responsible for your practice, what you can and should be doing to better protect yourselves and your clients. And then we'll close today with some cybersecurity best practices, some things that we can all be doing to be safer citizens on the internet. Now, I tell people all the time, cybersecurity is not about perfection, right? I don't expect anyone here to go away and do all the things we're going to talk about this morning. It really is about not being the sickest gazelle, right? So I'm hoping that every single one of you today is going to take away one thing that you're going to do differently in your practice and at home. Now, of course, as women, many of us are not just the cybersecurity stewards for our business, for our practice. We are also the stewards of cybersecurity for our parents, for our family, for our children. And so the things we'll talk about today are best practices for all aspects of our lives. Sound like a plan? Okay, so what am I worried about in this job? Well, I would tell you, up until a couple of weeks ago, North Korea was at the top of my list in terms of threats to us and to our firms. Why? North Korea, of course, is up against staunch international sanctions. They have no domestic economy to speak of, and yet they're trying to fund a wildly expensive missile and nuclear program. So how are they doing this? How is North Korea funding its government? Well, they've essentially made it a plank of their national strategy that they're going to fund their government by hacking into banks and stealing money. It's the old adage, right? Why rob banks? It's where the money is. That is the approach the North Koreans are taking. And unfortunate for us, they have resourced this strategy at a very high level. So estimates now have it at 7,000 people within the North Korean government who have bank hacking as their full-time job. Now, I tell my kids all the time that they should be very grateful they did not grow up in North Korea. Add another reason to their list recently. The North Koreans have now implemented a policy whereby every 11-year-old child in North Korea is administered an aptitude test. You score best and brightest on the North Korean aptitude test, you're immediately on-ramped into the bank hacking program. Taken away from your family, moved into a dormitory, raised in the hacking culture, trained to be a bank hacker from the age of 11. So those ranks are growing. And the North Koreans are very successful with this bank hacking strategy. So many of you will be familiar with the Bank of Bangladesh heist, going back to 2016. This is where the North Koreans successfully hacked into the Central Bank of Bangladesh and stole close to $100 million. What people do not know about this particular hack, though, is that the North Koreans were a typographical error away from that being close to $1 billion, and that this was not a one-off for the North Koreans. This is their strategy. Just in the last 6 months, we've seen the North Koreans hit banks in Mexico, in Chile, in Russia, Malaysia, and just recently 2 large banks in India, carting off upwards of 30, 40, even $60 million out of these banks. But I told you that North Korea recently fell to 2 on Rachel's personal cybersecurity depth chart. So who's my new number 1? Well, Iran is back on top of my sleepless nights. When we reinstituted those sanctions against the Central Bank of Iran and their oil sector a few weeks ago, what we expected to see is exactly what we've seen, and that is a significant upswing in Iranian cyber activity against the financial sector holistically, again in retaliation for those financial sanctions. Now, I am very fortunate in this job that I am not fighting this fight alone. My firm is not fighting this fight alone. While we may be competing on many fronts, when it comes to cybersecurity, we are all in this together. Our firms have collectively signed a very explicit non-compete agreement that both allows and frankly requires us to work together when it comes to cybersecurity. And so we are all collaborating in this space. Literally every morning I am on a phone call with my peers up and down the street talking about what we saw overnight, what we're worried about coming into the next day, and what we need to be doing as a sector to raise the security of our firms and to better protect our clients. Now, at a level below these nation states, other big trend to be aware of over the last 2 years is the rise in activity of what I would call cyber criminal syndicates. So think of these as traditional organized crime rings now using cyber means to conduct their crimes. Now, these groups are interesting because their tradecraft, their cyber activities online, tend to look a lot like the North Koreans, which really baffled us until we thought for a moment about how much those North Korean hackers were getting paid, right? Pittance, next to nothing. There's no money in North Korean government hacking. Now, I will tell you, they certainly are a well-motivated workforce, right? Because poor job performance in North Korea comes with significant consequences, but they are not well compensated. So what's the perk? What's the benny to being that North Korean government hacker? Well, it's that you get to take your cyber toolkit home with you nights and weekends, and you get to use it for your own personal betterment. And that's what we see not just in North Korea, but in Russia, China, all across Eastern Europe. Hackers that work for their government by day and then work as hackers for hire nights and weekends. And that may mean they're coming up against us. The group I've been most focused on lately is a group called money takers. You gotta love it, right? That's their brand. That's their name. They're totally unabashed about this. This is bank robberies in 2018. They don't need the masks, they don't need the guns. They're simply going to use cyber means to conduct these bank robberies. Now, money takers, I'll tell you, they're not coming after the big firms, right? We are too big, too hard of nuts to crack in this case. They're really going after local banks, smaller firms, credit unions, part of their niche. For banks, it's really 5 branches or less. They recognize that these smaller firms can be really the soft underbelly of the industry, and that's where they've been targeting their efforts. Money Takers is successful. In the last 18 months, we've seen them hit 20 different local banks across the United States, successfully stealing money in each and every case. At a level below these cyber criminal syndicates, other big trend touching each and every one of us every day now is the trend around traditional fraud now enabled with cyber means. So a cyber fraud now at a scope, scale, and velocity that frankly exceeds what I could have imagined even 2 years ago. Now, what might this cyber-enabled fraud look like? Well, imagine a hacker goes out to the dark web. This is just the part of the internet that's not indexed. You can't get there through a Google search. I would imagine folks in this room probably not spending a lot of time on the dark web, and that's fine. I'm not suggesting any of us go. But the hacker goes out there and he buys 10 million credential pairs. These are just logins and passwords. Now, these logins and passwords that he's bought have nothing to do with your firm. These are the logins and passwords from Target, from Home Depot, from LinkedIn, from all of these companies that have been breached over the last few years. Hackers are going to go out there, dump all of those credentials on the dark web, make them available for sale, pennies on the dollar. Now, why does this hacker fraudster want all of these old logins and passwords from Target and what have you? Well, it's because he knows that many of us are victims of that particular form of human frailty that causes us to use the same login and password across multiple websites. Now, I'm sure none of us have ever done that, right? Because we know we shouldn't. We use that same password anywhere, and we're at risk everywhere we've used it if it gets compromised. But passwords are a pain, and so we tend to reuse the same or similar password. That's what the hacker's hoping, is that if he can throw those 10 million credential pairs against your front door, some small but non-zero percentage of them are going to turn out to be valid login and password for your client. But think how long that would take him, right, to fat finger in all of those logins and passwords. He'd be doing that for the rest of his life. So what does he do? He goes back to the dark web and he rents a botnet. Now, what's a botnet? Simply thousands of highly hackable endpoint devices all over the world. These are your Internet of Things type devices, smart TVs, smart refrigerators now, things with manufacturer default credentials where I, as the hacker, can very easily script up an attack and have all of those devices do my bidding simultaneously. And that's what we see, thousands of devices throwing millions of credentials against your front door just to see if any of them happen to work for your clients. Now, what does he do when he gets that thumbs up from the botnet? That's when we see the hacker logging into those accounts, trying to set up money movements, bill payments, liquidate positions, all the things you would expect to see a traditional fraudster do with compromised customer credentials. Now, what is the moral of the story here? Well, first and foremost, it's to make sure we are not using the same login and password for our banking or investing accounts that we're using anywhere else. And it's also to be leveraging things like multi-factor authentication. For your institution, that may mean registering your clients' devices. That may mean giving them an additional security token to use for their logins. That may mean encouraging them to use biometric authentication to log into their accounts with you. All of these much safer means of doing business with us than simply relying on a login and password alone. All right, last threat that I'll describe to all of you this morning, it's a threat that is going up against the 40 largest banks and financial institutions in America today, and it is the threat around mobile malware. So this is malicious software that's targeting the banking apps on your mobile device. The one we'll talk about today is a particular strain of malware called Marcher that has been targeting the 40 largest American banking and investing institutions since May of last year, specifically our Android client base. So my Android friends in the room today, I'm especially talking to you. So how does this malware Marcher work? Well, it starts by socially engineering our clients into downloading this malware onto their phones. Now, none of us would knowingly download malware, right? But unfortunately, it does not come with a skull and crossbones. It is not clearly malicious. Instead, it's always going to present itself as something benign, something innocuous, maybe as a software update, maybe as a game. This malware Marcher loves to pretend to be solitaire. So our client thinks she's downloading solitaire, now she has malware on her phone. The next thing it's going to do is socially engineer our clients into giving this malware admin level privileges on their devices, right? So a deep level of access on that device. How is it going to get that? It's simply going to ask for it. Now, we all download apps, right? And they all want a lot from us. They want access to our contacts, our locations, our photos, and we just click yes, 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 because we want to get on with it. Hopefully we don't do that. But if we did that in this case, we would give Marcher admin level privileges on our device, which is what's going to come back to bite us. So what happens next? I have Marcher on my phone. I launch my mobile banking application. Marcher detects this, and it throws up an overlay on top of my mobile banking app that looks exactly like what I'm expecting to see. Same colors, same branding, totally identical. Of course, commanded and controlled by the fraudster on the back end. I don't know this, so I enter my username and password. Now my username and password are compromised. But it's what happens next with Marcher that is particularly insidious. So of course, fraudster is now going to attempt to log into my account using my username and password on his device. But your institution, we're going to recognize this as an unusual login, to say the least. We're going to see this is not Rachel's IP address. This is not the device she has registered with us. She's not usually in Nigeria. All of this is going to look strange to us. And what do we do when we see a suspicious login to your client's accounts? Well, we prompt it with step-up authentication. We send them one of those 6-digit passcodes to their phone. They've got to enter in if they want to log into their account. But what's the problem here? Malware's on my phone, and because I gave it admin level privileges on my device, it has access to my text message queue. Hacker can go in, pull out that 6-digit passcode, meet my bank step-up authentication challenge. He's off to the races committing fraud in my account, can go back to my phone, delete that 6-digit passcode. I have no idea it was ever prompted. Now, I will tell you, your cybersecurity experts across your firms, we are all working together to counter the threats around malware like Marcher and to protect our collective clients, but we are very much in a cat and mouse game on this. This malware I just described, Marcher, any of us could, although I'm not suggesting you do, buy that particular piece of malware on the dark web tonight for $60. So that's the landscape we're dealing with. And what you all are seeing as a result is changes at your firms around cybersecurity. Your firms are all investing more than ever before to counter this litany of threats we've described, hiring more and better experts, buying more high-end cybersecurity technology, working with the assumption to a large degree that compromise is inevitable. If we'd been having this conversation 5-10 years ago, your cybersecurity experts would have been telling you that they were defending the perimeter of your networks. We used to have this view in cybersecurity that if we just built a wall that was tall enough and wide enough around our networks, that we could keep cyber actors out. But what we've learned over the last 5 years is that a truly concerted cyber actor is always going to find a way under, around, over that wall, and that all of us must have multiple layers of complementary controls all throughout our networks that allow us to very quickly detect that inevitable intrusion, quarantine it before it can spread, and eradicate it out of our networks before it can do us harm. That is the foundation of the spending and investment that you see across the financial sector. Globally, this year, the world will spend $9 billion on cybersecurity technology, all in response to this growing cyber threat. Now, my guess would be that many of you are seeing impacts to your practice, to your business, of what your cybersecurity practitioners are worried about. Now, my challenge to you today, go home next week and hug your cybersecurity experts. We tend not to be the most popular people at your firms. We're the ones sending you the phishing tests. We're the ones blocking your website access, causing friction in your business model, and forcing your clients to sign up for all of this additional authentication technology. But it's because we care, and it's because we are trying to protect you and your practice. We're doing more and more collectively to protect our clients. This means stronger and more multi-factor authentication options available to our clients to protect themselves as they're using our digital offerings. It means more and more practices, procedures to help protect them from risks they may not even be aware of on their end. But I would tell all of you in the room today, you too, despite everything your firms are doing to protect you and to protect your clients, you have a role in this as well. When we look back at the significant breaches that have occurred over the last few years, Equifax, Marriott just recently, the most unfortunate thing about these breaches is when you look at them in hindsight, there was always someone who knew. There was always someone who had recognized that weakness, that vulnerability, that flaw that eventually enabled that cybersecurity breach. And so I would invite all of you to take an approach just like we do on the New York subways, right? If you see something, please say something. You will know, right, when something feels off, when that email from your client doesn't feel quite right, when that piece of equipment in your branch isn't working the way it used to. These can all be signs of a cyber problem, and if we don't put our hands up and adopt this say something and see something culture, we're not going to be as safe as we could be. It also means encouraging our clients to better protect themselves. Now, what is your role in this? In all frankness, I want you to work with the assumption that your client has been hacked. Every client, every day. And that means being very, very skeptical of the communications you receive from them, especially if those communications are in email. Quick story. Recently, we've been working with a family office in Denver that was buying a piece of real estate in Hong Kong. Been working with this family office for a decade. We know them all, we know them well, and we knew, of course, through months of correspondence that they were getting ready to buy this piece of real estate. What we didn't know, and what they didn't know, was that their email server had been hacked, and that the hacker was watching all of the correspondence between us and them for the last 3 months. The day the time came to close on that particular piece of real estate, that's when the actor chose to strike. The family office sent the piece of correspondence with the wire instructions to purchase that piece of real estate in Hong Kong. The hacker intercepted that communication and injected a new one in almost real time that was absolutely identical to the legitimate communication the family office sent, except a different account number. Now, of course, we all followed protocol, right? We called back to that family office and said, wow, this is a big sum of money. Just want to make sure that you truly want us to execute these instructions. And of course, the family office said, yes, this is exactly the wire we want to execute. Now, how did we catch this? What is the diligence we now need to apply? We've got to go digit by digit. It is not enough to simply say, did you send these wire instructions? We've got to verify every digit of that instruction to make sure that what we received is truly what that family office sent. Other things in this space, of course, mean working and talking to our clients about cybersecurity as part of our daily practice with them. It's working with the assumption that if our client has not yet experienced her Cyber D-Day, she will. Just recently, we've been working with a client of ours in Connecticut. Her advisor called me at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday and said, Rachel, I'm a little bit concerned about my client. I got a call this morning from your fraud operations people about 7 a.m., and they're seeing some very suspicious logins attempted to her account. I've been trying to reach her all morning, and she's retired. She usually answers the phone whenever I call. She's not answering the phone, and I don't know what to make of this. I said to the advisor, well, have you tried to reach her via email? She says, yes, I've been trying to reach Barbara over email, and she's not answering email either. All of this is creating concern for me. Now, her concerns were a little different than mine, but I felt strongly, as did this advisor, that we needed to find her client quickly. So we spent the next hour figuring out what mutual contacts we had and eventually got her client on the phone through the coworker's daughter. It was a strange triangulated loop. We finally get the client on the phone, and we say, Barbara, is anything weird going on this morning? And she said, yes. I can't seem to send or receive text messages. I am not getting any phone calls, and the password for my email accounts is not working. Well, I spent about an hour with that client that morning, and what we discovered was that about a month prior, she'd clicked on a link in a phishing email, had ended up with malware on her home computer, and what that malware did was capture all of her keystrokes for a month, all of her logins and passwords, captured all of the logins and passwords to her banking and investing accounts, captured the logins and passwords to her email, and then waited. And this is what she had done the day before. This is the coup de grace, had captured the login and password for her mobile provider login. When she had gone in the day before to pay her mobile bill, that's when he had gotten the login and password to those accounts. So what did he do? At 1 o'clock in the morning that night before, he logged into all of her accounts, changed all of her passwords. She was essentially locked out of her digital life instantaneously. Then, of course, the actor starts logging into her accounts, attempting to log into her accounts, do all the things you would expect a fraudster to do. None of her advisors can reach her. Her emails were all misdirected, and of course he had used his access to her mobile provider to route all of her text messages and phone calls, auto-forward all of them to his device. So he's getting her one-time passcodes through text messages, and none of us could reach her by phone. Now, I spent a good chunk of the next week helping this client reconstitute her digital existence on a clean device, reset all of her passwords, prevent her from reusing the same or similar passwords across multiple logins, and establishing multi-factor authentication for all of her logins. This is the conversation, though, that we need to be having with our clients before their digital life goes up in flames, so that we help them prevent this kind of wholesale cyber attack to their personal digital footprint, and that we have a plan in place. So for if and when that significant cyber intrusion occurs, we know the steps we're going to take. We know the conversation we're going to have. We know the advice we're going to give when our client is having that Cyber D-Day. All right, a few quick tips, some practices we can be thinking about both at work and at home, with our parents, with our children. I will tell you the most important thing we all need to be doing is keeping our devices fully patched and up to date. Now, what's a patch? It's just a software update. We're getting patches all the time. Your Windows machines, your MacBook, it is getting software updates. It is getting patches. It is important when you get that flag that says you have a software update that you go ahead and update your machine quickly. For my iPhone friends, right? Apple is always sending us patches. It's 11, 11.1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're all running 12.1, right? It's important that we update these things quickly because those patches contain the fixes to all of the security flaws and bugs and vulnerabilities that have been discovered by your software manufacturers. It's important that we leverage multi-factor authentication, not just for our banking and investing accounts, but for all of our high-consequence accounts. Think of how much you rely on your email. Think of how much information is resident in your email. We have to be protecting those email accounts. It's also relevant that we run, especially for those of us using Windows machines, I want all of us running a reputable, I will add the word American, please, antivirus product on those devices. I'm good with any of the American products in this space, but I want you to steer clear of the Russian and Chinese antivirus products, right? Don't want any of you inadvertently becoming an agent of the Russian government. Please stick to the American products. When we're banking and investing online or doing anything high consequence, it's important that we consider not just what we are connecting to the internet, but also how we are connecting to the internet. And that means steering clear of open public Wi-Fi hotspots. If that hotspot says unsecured, it is precisely that. When you use that open public Wi-Fi hotspot without any additional protection, a virtual private network or VPN, anything you are transmitting back and forth with the internet can be seen by anyone else who is using that Wi-Fi hotspot and is properly motivated. This can also put us at risk, especially when we're traveling. So we see less of this in the United States, more of it in Europe. It's pretty classic Russian tradecraft. The Russians will hack into a hotel chain. They will get onto the Wi-Fi routers that service the hotel, and they will use those routers to inject malware onto the computers of visiting guests. So what to do instead? Well, consider using a virtual private network, a VPN. Your firms all likely provision these to you to allow you to safely work from anywhere. Or simply stick to the mobile network. That mobile network, that LTE channel that you see on your phone, that is end-to-end encrypted, much safer way of connecting to the internet than using that open public Wi-Fi hotspot. So thinking about your phones for a minute. Certainly, we want to make sure we are only downloading apps from our designated app store. So for my Android friends, that's Google Play. For iPhone folks, that's the App Store, not from pop-ups, not from websites, not from links and text messages or emails. Those third-party apps, much more likely to be malicious, much more likely to be Marcher than the ones that have been curated in your designated app stores. You only want to give the apps on your phone the permissions they truly need. Facebook taught us this, right? But I'll tell you, based on my experiences with our clients, no good will come from giving an app access to your photos if it does not need access to your photos. That only ends badly. And lastly, we want to be conscientious about how and where we charge our mobile devices. We want to steer clear of publicly available charging cords and publicly available USB ports like the ones you see in airports. You want to stick to your cord, your power supply. This is the Uber driver who says, hey, want to charge your phone using my cord? The answer is always no. Your cord, your power supply. You don't want anyone using that publicly available charging cord to inject malware onto your device or to silently exfiltrate the data off of your device. You guys are all going to go home and be junkies for this like I am. You're going to be my ladies of cybersecurity. Go home tonight. You can watch endless YouTube videos of people using publicly available charging cords to do exactly this. All right, before we open it up for a couple questions, two more quick tips. We talked about the pain that are passwords. What to do instead? Who here is using a password manager app? I am a big fan of these. Smart ladies here. So these password manager apps, these are things like LastPass, Dashlane, Keeper, 1Password. I'm agnostic as to which one you use. The tech is all largely the same. These password manager apps will create unique complex passwords for you for all of your logins, whether they're app-based or browser-based, and then they will store those passwords for you in a cryptographically sound way, either encrypted state, either on your device or in their secure cloud. Then when you need to access those passwords, they will autofill them right into your website based on either a passphrase that only you know that isn't written down anywhere, or even better, that biometric on your phone. Why do I love these? Unique passwords for all of your logins. No more kittens 25 for every login for the last decade. Complex passwords, maximally lengthy and complex. If it's a 60-character password field, this password manager app will give you a 60-character password. But you don't have to remember it, right? Because it's going to be auto-filled for you right in there based on that passphrase or biometric. But it's actually the storage of these passwords that I like best. Any of you today who are keeping your passwords in a notes file on your phone, Word document or Excel file on your home computer, or maybe my least favorite, I'm sure no one here, the Post-it note under the keyboard. These are not good places to be storing our passwords. Instead, storing them in a cryptographically sound way, much safer way of interacting with the internet. All right, last tip for all of you today. I recommend, as does the FBI, and it's something you could consider talking to your clients about, that you consider having a single standalone device that you use only for banking and investing activities. I'll tell you, this is the approach we've taken in my family for many years. My son, he's 12 years old, great kid, totally obsessed with online gaming. Fortnite, right? Who else has a Fortnite problem? Okay, I'm not alone. I'll tell you, Fortnite's taken over my family. I think it's driving down the IQ of America. I am not a fan. But it's not Fortnite that I worry about from a cybersecurity perspective. It's really all of the mods and skins and cheats that he's downloading to go with the game. It's all the websites that he's going to meet the other Fortniters, right? 2 years of gaming on his laptop, and the thing is grinding under the weight of the malware he has running on it at this point. It is hacked. No two ways about it. But as his mom, I'll tell you, I really don't care, because I would not touch my son's laptop with a 10-foot pole. I would not log into anything on his device knowing how hacked it is. Likewise, he knows that mommy's laptop is untouchable to him, only for banking and investing activities, not for social media, not for webmail, not for online shopping, and certainly not for online gaming. And by, in this way, physically bifurcating my high-risk activities from my high-consequence activities, I can better protect myself. Now, I'll tell you, highly paranoid person that I am, I have also bifurcated my network behind this, because I do not want anyone transiting my router, pivoting through my router to get from one device to the next. In fact, if my husband were here, he would tell you with a big smile how annoying I am to be married to, right? Because I insisted when we moved to New York last year on 3 separate Wi-Fi networks in our apartment. One, high bandwidth, low latency for my son's gaming, my daughter's equally voluminous social media. One that is only for banking and investing, totally locked down under a VPN, only my one laptop connected to it. One that is for my guests, because of course I do not trust my guests. I'm not suggesting that any of you need to join me, in the highly paranoid crouch in which I live my life, but I hope that this has been helpful today in that one thing that you're going to do different to be a safer citizen on the internet. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll do 1 or 2 quick questions.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you.
Good morning.
Both entertaining and, scary at the same time. So my question is to the point, we see all these hackings and all this information, between Marriott, Experian, et cetera. When are firms going to understand that there's consequences to getting this information out there? Because I don't see that some kind of oversight might take place. So
You make an excellent point. Why don't we see more repercussions to the firms that get hacked in these ways? And it's something that we as an industry are talking about. What do we need to do to establish more accountability so that there are consequences for these breaches of so much American information? I mean, certainly with Equifax, right? 150 million American Social Security numbers now in the public domain. That's a game changer for all of us as consumers. Very little consequence associated with that. So something we're working on, but I absolutely share your concern. Okay.
Thank you so much for your practical advice. The question I have is, you said that $9 billion is being spent right now to protect, but these losses are real. How are the losses being made up? Are these firms carrying insurance to cover their losses?
So wonderful question. We're spending $9 billion, to your point, on defending the global infrastructure from cybersecurity threats, but the losses are mounting. The losses are real, and they're not just real to us as individuals, but they're real to us in our firms. Cybersecurity insurance is part of the answer, but all too often what we see is that if you are found to have been in breach of some aspects of your insurance contract, you're not necessarily going to get paid in the end. You look at Equifax, despite that breach having significant financial consequences because of some mistakes they made, they ended up not getting a dime from their cyber insurance. So that needs to be a piece, but not the totality of our cybersecurity strategy. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Shirley.
Rachel. Thank you, Morgan Stanley.
Thank you.
Great presentation.